Now, exporting is simpler than it seems, but I'm going to run through all of your tools, okay? So the export settings here: format, preset, comments, output name, what are we exporting, and a summary. The summary essentially reflects these export settings here and all the different options down here below. Pretty much 100% of the time, the format just needs to match the format that it was recorded in and that it was edited in. In most circumstances, that's going to be H.264. So for most of your DSLRs and even a lot of your cinema cameras, that's going to be H.265 for some of the newer higher end cutting edge cameras. That's going to be MPEG-4 in kind of weird circumstances. It's going to be QuickTime or ProRes with like really, really data heavy raw imagery like a RED. There are lots of presets. Don't get overwhelmed by this. These are just settings that Adobe put together that they think are good, normal standards most of the time, right? So if you hit YouTube 1080 Full HD, it's just gonna do the settings that Adobe knows are typically best working with YouTube. However, it's not always the case, and the way that you export needs to be informed by two things, okay? When you're ready to export and you're ready to do the finished product, you need to inform yourself with two things. The first thing is what formats have you been editing in? What was it shot on? What have been the codecs and formats that we've been working through? You should probably stick with those, because obviously. But the other thing that should inform the export is the intended distribution method. YouTube is one of the most flexible streaming platforms. It can take almost any video in almost any format and it will recompress it to work on the platform. And even then, it has some issues with certain kinds of videos. And of course, the more specific the channel, the more specific their export requirements. When we were finally exporting the episodes for our reality TV series that was getting distributed on Discovery Plus, there were a lot of very specific requirements that they had. So in that case, you literally just follow the guidelines that the distributor gives you. If you're publishing on YouTube, just go look up what YouTube wants and export with those settings. It's pretty much that straightforward. I'm going to run through a bunch of stuff so that you know what it means. Match sequence settings is usually the safest way to do it. You can't necessarily go wrong. If you were careful to make sure that you set up your settings correctly to begin with, then you're going to be fine. But let's say that we want to change things up. We're doing things a little bit differently. So we know that we're exporting to YouTube. So H.264 is definitely the best way to go. Now, this is defaulting to 1280 720 for some reason. I would like to do the full resolution of my settings. So this checkbox here means match this property to the source video. So I want to check that. So now I'm going to be exporting at 4K. So this is my resolution, my pixels wide by my pixels tall. This is my frame rate. 23.976 is the 24 frames a second that most people do in film. Field order. I don't understand this exactly, but I believe that this is the way that it goes about writing or rendering the pixels. I've never messed with that setting in my life. And aspect, square pixels are usually the way to go. But again, like HD anamorphic is 1.33. The pixels are weird. So again, matching the source is usually the best option here. Render at maximum depth. I don't know what that changes. I don't know why it wouldn't all the time. So I usually have this unchecked when I'm doing tests or purposeful low quality renders, and then I'll check it when I want it fully done. Typically, I do software encoding. I don't really understand the difference between hardware and software encoding. I think hardware encoding is faster, but has much more demanding requirements on your computer. The color space is the color science that the software is using to understand the elements. If you record in one color space and then you export in a different color space, the colors will look significantly different. So you need to know the color space that it was recorded in and usually stick to it. Now, I don't know what VBR stands for, but I do know that VBR2 pass does the entire export twice and then kind of takes the best version, puts those two together. So if you do a VBR2 pass, you have the highest quality possible. Now audio, AAC or MPEG, I usually do AAC. I usually do 48,000 hertz. channels stereo. 320 is pretty standard as far as audio as well. Now there's a few effects that can be helpful. A Lumetri look or a LUT. A LUT is a lookup table. It basically gives the software a way to interpret the colors. So LUTs are very common for more cinematic filmmaking type videos where you want to do something intentional with your colors. Lookup tables are essentially a way to color grade without having to do a ton of customization yourself. There are a lot of lookup tables that you can download and purchase from cinematographers, where they have made a certain lookup table that works with a specific camera in a specific lighting situation. And it's just kind of like if you're shooting outdoors with bright sun and you're shooting on this camera, then these lookup tables that the cinematographer supplies will just probably look good by default. So those are sick. And I've used those on occasion. So there's a lot of other weird effects that you can do in the export process. For example, you can lay an image over top. Or you can do a name overlay over top, or you can do a time code overlay. You can obviously do all of these things within the timeline, within your sequence, so I'm not sure why you wouldn't do it there. But like time code overlay is especially helpful. You can modify the time code to be a specific thing before you export it out. And then this will burn it in, and then you'll have something to reference. So if for example, you're sending exports to be reviewed and you don't have a service like frame.io, which allows you to do frame specific feedback, this is a really good way. So now there's a burned in time code, and whoever's watching your video can look at that and give you exact time code numbers of what feedback that they have. Time Tuner allows you to completely change the overall duration, and it will basically speed everything up or slow everything down. It's like a speed ramp, but for the entire export. It does actually a pretty good job, and this is a really good way for, like, so for example, if you have a social media video that is going to be put online and it has to be under 15 seconds, but you have a really good cut that's 16 seconds long, well, you could pull it in here, and then you could do like a -7% duration change, and then the entire export would be just ever so slightly sped up, and you might be able to hit the sub 15-second mark without actually having to remove significant portions of the edit because the 16 worked better. So Time Tuner is awesome. And then obviously if you've done captions, then you're going to need to change that to choose whether or not you want those captions burned in or exported as a side file. You can queue, which will send it to Adobe Media Encoder, or you can export, which will do it within Premiere. And then of course, you do your output, and what I'll usually do is I'll do the same naming conventions as before, but it'll probably include a rough or a locked cut and a date and a version number. And then you hit export. And then the export can take anywhere from a couple of seconds to literally days, depending on the demand and difficulty of the render and the length, plus the hardware on your computer. Obviously, the better hardware you have, the better RAM, GPU, and CPU you have, the faster it'll export because the more computing power it has. And that's how you export a video.